On the morning of May 10, 1996, guides and clients from rival Everest expeditions ignored forecasts of a lethal storm, crowding the same summit route in a race against time. Hours later, disaster struck. 8 climbers perished in a single blizzard, forcing one professional guide to witness his team's collapse as he made an unthinkable final decision. What led experienced leaders and hopeful amateurs alike to gamble with lives that day? And did anyone really grasp how close catastrophe was before it was far too late? Rob Hall was 35 years old, a New Zealander with 5 Everest summits to his name, and a reputation for running the most professional guiding operation on the world's highest mountain. He wasn't just a climber, he was the architect of a new business model that promised ordinary people, for a steep fee, the chance to stand on the summit of Everest. His company, Adventure Consultants, sold the idea that with the right guide, even those without elite mountaineering backgrounds could reach the top safely. Hall's expeditions were organized down to the smallest detail, and his earlier success rates had set a standard in the industry. But the stakes in 1996 were higher than ever. That spring, Hall struck a deal with Outside Magazine, bringing a journalist along in exchange for coverage that would boost Adventure Consultants' profile. The contract added another layer to the pressure. Not just client expectations, but the eyes of the world were now watching. Hall's operation depended on his image as the guide who could deliver both safety and success. Each client represented tens of thousands of dollars, and every successful summit meant future bookings. Yet, beneath the glossy brochures and media contracts, Hall faced the same risks as every climber. He knew how quickly Everest could turn from a business venture into a fight for survival. In 1996, as more guided teams crowded the mountain, Hall stood at the center of a system built on fragile trust between guide and client, profit and safety, ambition and reality. On May 8th, just 2 days before the summit push, a weather bulletin reached Everest Base Camp. The message was clear. A powerful storm was expected to peak on May 11th. Expedition leaders, including Rob Hall, acknowledged the forecast over radio. Still, plans for a May 10th summit attempt stayed in place. The warnings were not vague or secondhand. They were dated, relayed, and received by those guiding clients toward the top. The people climbing with Hall in 1996 were not seasoned Himalayan veterans. According to the Himalayan database, only Yasuko Namba had ever stood on an 8,000-meter summit before. The rest faced the world's highest mountain, with no personal history above that altitude. Many came from backgrounds far removed from high-altitude hardship: a postal worker, a journalist, a businessman. Their strength and determination were real, but their bodies and minds were untested in the thin air where small mistakes become fatal. This mismatch was not unique to one team. Commercial expeditions that season brought together clients with wildly different levels of experience and fitness. For some, Everest was the final step in a long climbing journey. For others, it was a leap of faith, taken on the promise of expert guidance and a hefty fee. The business model depended on trust. Trust that the guides would make the right call. Trust that the mountain would allow safe passage. Trust that warning signs would be heeded. But as the summit day approached, the gap between forecast and decision, between experience and ambition, grew wider. Every hour lost to hesitation or delay at altitude would soon carry a higher price than anyone imagined. Climbers moving toward Everest's summit in the early hours of May 10 quickly ran into a problem no one could ignore. At the heart of the route, just below the final ridge, the fixed ropes that should have been anchored in place were missing. The Hillary Step, an exposed nearly vertical rock face at 28,700 feet, remained unrigged. Instead of moving efficiently, dozens of climbers from multiple expeditions bunched together, waiting for Sherpa rope fixers to arrive and set lines on the spot. The rope fixing team, delayed by their own heavy loads and the sheer number of people on the mountain, struggled to get ahead of the crowd. As clients and guides waited, the line stretched along the ridge, with some climbers standing still for nearly 1 hour in the death zone. Each minute spent motionless at this altitude burned through precious oxygen and sapped strength. The bottleneck at the Hillary Step became a choke point, with more than 30 climbers forced to queue in the thin air. The delay rippled backward, pushing everyone's summit timeline later into the day. The planned margin for error grew thinner with every passing minute. By the time the ropes were finally secured and the line began to move, the window for a safe descent had already started to close. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the agreed turnaround time had come and gone. Still, climbers pressed upward, drawn by ambition and the promise of the summit. Watches ticked past 3:30 in the afternoon as groups reached the top, far later than any guide would consider safe. The mountain's margin for error was gone. On the upper slopes, the wind began to howl. Temperatures plummeted to -40 degrees. Visibility dropped in an instant, the sky closing in with a wall of white. What had been a steady descent transformed into a desperate fight to survive. Hurricane-force gusts tore through the ridges, erasing tracks and hiding the fixed ropes. Climbers could barely see their own boots, let alone the route back to Camp 4. Oxygen supplies dwindled as the cold sapped strength and slowed every movement. Radios crackled with confusion, but voices were lost in the storm. Teams scattered, some just steps from safety, but unable to find their way. The line between order and chaos vanished, replaced by a blizzard that cared nothing for experience, planning, or hope. On Everest that afternoon, time ran out for those still above the South Kerno. Rob Hall and Doug Hansen lingered near the top of the world as the storm closed in, pinned down by exhaustion and dwindling oxygen. Hansen, a postal worker from Seattle, had tried for the summit once before and failed. This time, he stood just below the peak, utterly spent, unable to descend. Hall, the guide who built his reputation on bringing clients home, refused to leave him behind. While other climbers struggled down in whiteout conditions, Hall stayed at 28,700 feet, radioing for help and hoping for a break that never came. As night fell, Hall's voice crackled through the satellite phone to his wife Jan Arnold, who was pregnant with their first child. He told her, "I love you. Sleep well, my sweetheart. Please do not worry too much." The line went quiet, but his decision echoed through the mountain. Hall's body was found 2 weeks later, frozen just 300 feet below the summit. He died where he stood, choosing loyalty to his client over the slim chance of saving himself. In that final act, the cost of trust on Everest became heartbreakingly clear. Scott Fisher, leader of the Mountain Madness expedition, collapsed on the southeast ridge, unable to descend any farther. He was just 350 meters below the south summit, suffering from high-altitude cerebral edema. Disoriented and exhausted, Fisher's condition left him unable to guide himself or others. His body was discovered by climbers days later, a stark reminder of how quickly the mountain can overpower even its strongest guides. Yasuko Namba, at 47, became the oldest woman to summit Everest. With 6 of the 7 summits already behind her, Everest was her final goal. She reached the top but collapsed from exposure during the descent, found at 26,000 feet on the South Kerno. Despite her achievement, her body could not withstand the cold. She died hours after fulfilling her dream, her story echoing the razor-thin line between triumph and tragedy at extreme altitude. As survivors returned, the public narrative fractured. Jon Krakauer's best-selling account Into Thin Air questioned decision-making on the mountain, focusing scrutiny on guides like Anatoly Bukreev. Bukreev published his own defense, The Climb, challenging Krakauer's timeline and motivations. The debate fueled a broader reckoning within the guiding community. By 1997, expeditions began enforcing stricter turnaround rules and screening clients more rigorously, hoping to prevent future disasters. The events of 1996 forced climbers and guides alike to confront the ethical boundaries of commercial mountaineering. Everest now sees more climbers each year than ever before, yet the mountain's risks remain absolute. Commercial pressure still tests the limits of safety and judgment. Every summit attempt is a reminder. On this peak, nature, not ambition or money, calls the final shot. Stay vigilant. Stay human.